Good evening, world. This is Steve Rao, the host of World Edition on Pod TV IBM. And from our family to yours, we wish you a happy holiday season. Today, we're here in a special edition of The Wote, the worst president of all time, as we prepare, based on Mark Lee's LinkedIn poll, to announce the worst president in the history of the United States on President's Day. Today, I have the honor of moderating this esteemed panel that we have today. And I'll begin with a quick monologue and insight before we begin our program today. Today, we're analyzing the presidencies of Jimmy Carter, Donald J. Trump, Richard Nixon, and Barack Obama, I think, as four presidents which one was the worst of those four. Now, as we analyze these presidents, here's what I'm going to say to the listening audience. I think there's three major categories that I'd like our panelists to focus in on today. One is these presidents of the United States and their handlings of crisis in the domestic and foreign policy crisis. How did they manage crisis? The great presidents like Roosevelt managed crisis really well during the Great Depression and World War II. How did they do it in their respective eras? The second is the economy. How did the economy bode after the presidency? And did that have a factor in them being reelected or not reelected? And then the third is foreign policy. As the leader of the free world, how did these presidents do to inspire other nations around the world, building alliances with other nations so that they can lead America forward in a coalition of success? So those are the factors today as we analyze the Wote, the worst presidents of all time. Today I have with me Nick Paladiva, I think he's here, Kimberly Calhoun, the founders of Pod TV, our bosses, want to thank them. We're still going to be joining Roku Network, which is so exciting. We have Adam Lamparello from a professor of the University of Georgia, but he's in New Jersey. Adam, welcome. We're so honored to have you.
Thank
Peter
you.
with us. Peter.
Hi, Peter Bennett.
Yes, Peter Bennett. Thank you so much. And I don't know if Mark Lee is joining, but this is the panel we have today. Oh, and Sasha Starr from Canada, who hosts Chess Stars and Modern Investing with Sasha. Sasha, welcome from Canada.
Thank you.
So we're going to go ahead and begin. I guess we'll just go down the row. I laid out the criteria, the three major criterias. And today, as a moderator, I'm going to really take a step back and let you guys, my team, do the analysis. I am a moderate Democrat, so it's not going to be easy to get in there and bash Trump. But I'm in a good festive holiday mood today. I'm going to be really nice, and I'm going to try to be objective. So with that being said, let's start with Peter to give your assessment of where we're going in tonight in terms of these four that I've listed. Then we're going to go to Sasha and Kim and Nick and everybody and Adam. We want to hear from Adam Lamparello as well.
Well, there's a lot of places to start on that question. I guess I would say, the one who I would not include at all would be Jackson. And I'll tell you why. And he's a controversial figure for sure. But I studied him today. By a lot of criteria, he was very successful, and he's certainly very effective. So if you look at the economy under Jackson, it was strong, and there were four measures that I look at. There's a measure of unemployment, inflation, GDP growth, and budget deficits. He was very good there. And actually, he wasn't the best, but he was solid. But also, he was the only president in the history of the United States to pay off the national debt. So that was impressive, considering what some of the others have done. Foreign affairs, he was extremely successful. At that time, France and several European countries were taking over ships, American ships, and even taking sailors off of ships because of debts, prior debts of the United States. And he settled these crises internationally. South Carolina was about to succeed from the Union, not because of slavery, surprisingly, but because of a tariff. And he saved that situation, which came very close to being a tariff. He purged a lot of corruption in Washington. He actually found $250,000, which in those days was a lot of money, which was stolen by politicians, and he recovered that. And he cut $1 million, which was, again, a lot of money in those days, off of the Navy's expenses just through cutting corruption. And then we get to the controversial area, the Indians. So he was successful without a doubt in the sense that he negotiated treaties with 5 Indian nations. They were called the civilized nations back then, I guess because they accepted more of the white man's way. They agreed to allow possible Christianity, things like that. But so you could view this in different ways, but he did get those 5 Indian nations to agree to a treaty. And that all sounds good. So he's very effective again. And also, just keeping in this context, a few points. One, there were only 125,000 Indians living on millions of acres in the American South. We're talking about Florida, Georgia, Mississippi. So his goal of his treaties, which was ratified, which was passed by Congress, by the way, Congress passed something that gave him the power. They said we should basically negotiate with the Indians, allow them to stay on if they wanted, but try to get them to move to eastern or western Mississippi. So this was the thing about this. First of all, is besides it was really a small population on a very big land.
Yeah.
But you could view this in two ways. Was the fact that the people of America wanted this. Now, but this is where it gets controversial, and then I'll let other people jump in. But this is where it's controversial. So several of the treaties were signed, and the Indians moved. They just agreed to it. They were happy because they were given other land, and maybe there was pressure. But again, remember there was a lot of battles between white people and Indians at that time. The white settlers wanted those lands, and they thought it was unfair that the Indians had so much land. But anyway, here's where it gets really controversial. So one or two of the tribes, by the way, agreed to it and then later decided not to. So there were wars, and he won those wars and he got them to move. And that's a little controversial. But then we get to the Cherokees, and this is where it's very controversial. But I'm not going to hold that against him that much. And I'll tell you why. First of all, because he was effective. Second of all, because this is what the American people in Congress wanted. They wanted America to expand, the United States of America. So, but what he did was very unquestionable, at least unethical. So what happened is the Cherokees sent representatives and they signed the treaties, but it wasn't the Cherokee Nation leaders. So those leaders later said, we don't want to move. We didn't agree to this, but he forced them to move. And that comes to the Trail of Tears, which he's blamed for. The Cherokee had to travel 1,200 miles and they didn't want to. And that treaty was really questionable ethically. But then again, based on the times, I would say that he was effective, and certainly given some terrible other presidents, I wouldn't give it to him.
We're going to come back to Peter. So everyone, just sort of chime in real quickly with just a quick answer of who you rate as the worst. We're going to go to Adam Lamparello, since we haven't had him on before in a long time. Then we're going to go to Sasha, Kimberly, and then Mark. So Adam, what are your thoughts? And then I apologize to the audience. I had made a mistake just a fraudulent slip. I meant Jackson. So we're looking at Trump, Carter, Jackson, and Mark. What's the other one? Sorry.
Yeah, you got them right. It's Trump, Obama, Carter, and Andrew Jackson. So those are
who's it going to be, Adam
that are on the table right now.
Well,
and the worst president will eliminate 2 more, and we'll get 2 more because it's kind of like the Survivor round of doing this whole process and everything. So who knows? Adam may get one of his wishes. I've been thinking about that during the course of the day and all of that. But we'll see what happens in that regard.
Obviously, from Peter's perspective, not Jackson. But what are your thoughts?
Well, the worst president in the history of this country is undoubtedly Joe Biden. But since Joe Biden is not the subject of our discussion today, I'm forced to pick among these 4 people. And the answer is unquestionably Jimmy Carter. On economic, domestic, foreign policy, he was abjectly terrible. If you look at inflation, if you look at the state of the economy, if you look at the incredibly high tax rates, if you look at the Iran hostage crisis, and if you look at his genuine lack of leadership and inability to inspire any American whatsoever, he was by far the worst. And the critical factor undergirding his ineffectiveness was that he had a sense of moral righteousness about issues. He thought he was always right, and that led to an inflexibility in dealing with Congress and with the people. Jimmy Carter is by far, among these 4, the worst president in history.
Adam, thank you for being so clear, and I think you've made some very strong arguments there. Sasha Starr, what are your thoughts? Looking outside from Canada.
Okay, a couple of things. If it wouldn't be for Donald Trump, I would agree definitely with Adam about Jimmy Carter. because everything what he said about him is, I agree with all that. Um, Although I'm surprised that Obama is on the list. I remember that when he was first elected the president, he got the country in horrible economic situation where there was a huge crisis, real estate mortgages, financial. Actually, it was a world crisis. And by the time that he finished his 8 years, America was in pretty good shape, at least economically. I wouldn't praise his foreign policy, and that probably was his major weakness. But that alone hardly could make him the worst president ever. So, and of course, he had at least two. Um, mm, Twice was elected. Now, speaking about Donald Trump, I'm not going to go into his what he represents as a human being. That's all well known. I'm not going to repeat that. But just an optics of what he's achieved is one election only, lost second election, narrowly won the first one, twice impeached, lost the House, lost the Senate, and presidency. I don't know what else can make worse. Who else could be worse than Trump? It's hard to see.
Kimberly Calhoun, what are your thoughts? Well, it's obviously clear. I think we've got two that have made strong arguments with Carter. I mean, Sasha seems like he's open to that. But what are your thoughts as we look at the four, which I just listed: Donald Trump, Jimmy Carter, President Obama, and um, Andrew Jackson?
I don't think any of them are perfect. I think some of them go into their positions with idealisms that they're going to change the world and make it a better place. And they have to make compromises. And in those compromises, you can see a lot of their prejudice at the end of the day. I thought Andrew Jackson, being a Native American Indian myself, was very prejudiced. I felt him to be one of the most prejudiced presidents of the United States. But of course, I was from Native American Indian blood. But he also, I think, shut down the U.S. banks, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know all the history about him. I liked Carter. I thought he was friendly. But in my lifetime, as much as I like Obama, I thought he was the worst president for us, period. I hate his health care act. It did us no good. It actually hurt us. I felt like it was there to help the insurance companies monopolize. It was one of the first acts where the documentation on it was so big, people couldn't even read it, yet they claimed that they voted on it. So I personally would think, because our healthcare system is not affordable, I felt like his act hurt us more than it helped us, along with a few other things. Personally, I think he was a great person. I just felt like he was, in my opinion, in my lifetime, one of the worst presidents I ever experienced.
Okay. Yep. That's I'm gonna come back with just some other observations on that. But Mark Lee, what are your thoughts?
Mute. A couple of thoughts across that, and some of them were based on what Kimberly was just saying and everything. I think that sometimes certain presidents that come into office definitely haven't had a good reputation for where they came from. And when I think of Obama, I definitely think of somebody that was a grassroots leader and a very good grassroots leader, kind of in that spirit of, say, somebody like Martin Luther King, or if you want to look at somebody more modern, Reverend Barber, and things of that nature. But I don't know that they've always fall in understanding the political system and things along that line. So I think that was his major weakness, is he went in with a lot of ideals, a lot of things that he wanted to accomplish. And I've actually got friends that were part of things like Occupy Durham and some of that idealistic kind of campaigns, but they really expected him to come in and really disrupt the system. In some ways, they expected him to do almost a progressive version of what some people would say Trump did as well, but not understanding that part of the the system. I think that he kind of stepped into an ideal of learning the system. It's kind of like going and playing. I'm going to use one of Sasha's analogies: playing chess and not knowing what the pieces do. So you have to actually learn what the pieces do before you can actually figure out how to win the game. If I can use an analogy that I think Sasha will appreciate and all of that. So you can't go start playing the chess if you don't know what the moves are that the rook makes, what the moves are that the pawn makes, and what the moves are that the knight makes. And I think that that's kind of where he fell into. And then there was a lot of things that were going on in our world at that time. And he may have had some very great ideas that he was hoping to bring in, but he still had to maneuver and learn the system. And I think by the time he figured out the system, he was already painted into a kind of campaign and all of that of not being able to come to the kind of forefront that some of those activist leaders wanted him to do. Because I even know some that are frustrated now with some of his decisions, and some of them were decisions, even if you look at the military, I know there are quite a few folks that were not pleased with what he did in the sense of the drone attacks. And a lot of that was being directed and guided by advice he was getting from the Pentagon and others in the military. So that was kind of what I feel is one of his weaknesses. And I do think that he was a great grassroots leader, and I think he had a lot of potential, but I don't know that he reached the potential that he could have reached and all of that. And I definitely know that it was a historical first, whether you want to call him the first African-American president, or if you want to look at the mixed heritage and call him the first mixed president, it doesn't matter. But he definitely was a first, whether it was however you want to address it, in the sense of being a minority president. But even that can be argued, because there are some that will look at the bloodlines of some of our past presidents and argue that there might have been others that had similar bloodline as well, or they had mixed heritage in their blood that is not always recognized and all of that. But I'd love to hear what Adam thinks. I probably shocked him by being a little bit more progressive and maybe moderate than he usually expects from me and all of that.
Well, let me take it.
Can I
Go ahead.
defend Donald Trump now?
Yes, please, Adam. Go ahead.
Donald Trump signed the First Step Act, which led to a reduction in sentences for many criminal defendants, particularly minorities, something that Joe Biden never accomplished. In fact, Joe Biden signed the 1994 crime bill that increased sentences and increased policing. Donald Trump presided over the lowest ever unemployment rate for African Americans and Hispanics. Donald Trump appointed people to the Supreme Court who actually interpret the Constitution as it's intended, not as they wish it was intended. The economy prior to COVID was outstanding. Donald Trump is not in any way implicitly or explicitly even remotely close to being the worst president of the United States. Yes, his use of social media was despicable. His comments were offensive. But when you look at his policies, he shouldn't be in this group. If anybody should be in this group, it's Joe Biden.
Well, I mean, and it's funny that I don't agree with everything that you said, but I think it is important to look at the achievements from a policy perspective. So,
Well, Steve, who got criminal justice reform done?
Yeah,
A Republican, Donald Trump.
yeah, and also there has been talk about he did get the vaccines program started, the Trump tax cuts, claim credit for Israel and your United Arab Emirates, but I'm not really sure we really knew what that was about. I think the foreign policy was a bit of a fiasco, but it's really been a fiasco for the last 2 or 3 presidents, which is really a lack of clearly defined American policy in terms of military occupation in Afghanistan, what were we doing there. But each of these presidents, now I don't know as much about Andrew Jackson, so it's harder for me to study presidents that were that far out. But, I mean, you look at Obama, he had, they took out bin Laden. Affordable Health Care Act, some claim is a success. The Stimulus Act, he took over during bad times. He was able to get that passed. Some people view that as a success. And Jimmy Carter, the Camp David Accords, really the only success that I could find. I dog and I read. Couldn't see anything economically, didn't handle the hostage crisis, brought the Shah of Iran into the United States for medical care. The thing exploded. I think it's really hard to find those wins, those policy successes for Jimmy Carter. But with Jackson, I don't like the racism and prejudice. I just don't know how we factor that in rating the presidency, because it was, decades and centuries ago, right? How do we factor that? Go ahead.
Right. It was part of the times. I mean, the American people.
Right, that's what I was going to say.
Right. The American people wanted this. Even Congress wanted it. I mean, so he was effective, and it is controversial because he played hardball, but he was so effective. But if you look at the other areas, but I'm in an unusual case because I'm going to defend Trump and Obama, maybe one at a time. But look, Trump was a very controversial figure. There's no doubt about it. I mean, he's one of the most controversial, but everybody's controversial these days because of the media. But if you look at what he actually did, forgetting about his personality, he's a little gruff. He's not a great communicator. But, Adam just mentioned a few things, but he actually accomplished, if you look at his policies, and most people would agree on a lot of these things, he actually accomplished more and got more passed than any president, including FDR. I'll add to that list. He avoided wars. He wiped out ISIS totally. The economy was doing great. He forced Europe to pay for defense. He banned robocalls, more or less. He allowed the use of experimental drugs for treatment for those who are dying, basically. Now, a lot of these, he developed the coronavirus vaccine in a year when people said that it would impossible. So if you look at that, and he made U.S. basically, I would say energy independent. They say that. So people say, oh, we exported, imported, but we were basically a net neutral or net positive. These are all huge accomplishments that many people would have said couldn't be done. But he wasn't likable to a lot of people. And part of that was the media. And part of the impeachment process, it was all very political and very, but when you look at his actual accomplishments, he was very effective.
Kimberly, you had a point. Go ahead, Kimberly.
So, Peter, one of the things I love about you is you bring out the positive in everyone, and that's what I live for. And I appreciate that, and I do the same thing. I always look at what did each person do, but I'm going to correct you here.
Sure.
The medication to fix the United States with COVID existed. It existed back in 2015 and was being tested since 2015, and then taken off the market in 2014, called RTB101.
Oh, so you're saying the COVID? Sorry, you're choppy a little bit. Your acoustics are a little choppy. I think you're saying the COVID. I think you're saying the COVID development was early.
No, he already knew all this already existed that could help us. They haven't used it yet. It's been sitting there on the shelf.
That's possible.
So,
I don't know.
But
I'll tell you this.
We have documentation on all this. But what I'm saying is that no matter what, the worst thing that could happen to a country is when you hurt us with our health care, when you disable us with those kind of things you need in life, quality of life. And to me, a good president who pushes policies for quality of life, not war, who can mend and build the bridges, but each president has done good or bad. But I'm not going to give Trump credit for something he didn't earn. And one of that is...
You know what? Okay, so let me just say, it is possible it was in development. People still said that it was impossible.
No, go read my white papers. Go read my white papers.
So let me interject.
No, Tim, I'm not doubting you. Let me just say that either way, whatever he did do a lot. I mean, look, he's a businessman. He tried to, this is an example, but what he did, like the Woolman Rink in New York, they said it would take 10 years to build, and he built it in 6 months. I mean, he did so many steps, even whether or not it could have been developed in a year or not, I don't know, but he did so many steps to accelerate it. He pushed the FDA. He went to the private companies. He actively went. Now, I know we're not talking about Biden, but I just want to contrast this because this is shocking. So President Biden on tests. Tests are not as big a thing as the vaccine was back then. But back in December and January, this is just a contrast. Back in January and February and all year, Biden's been promising tests. It's December 28th, and they haven't even gone to contract yet. To the government, federal government hasn't even gone to contract for the tests. So here's Trump.
I won't argue some of this because a lot of this is more COVID based. And I will say there are a lot of things that if Biden were on the list, I would nail him for. But to
Right.
give
Well, he'll probably be on the list at some point.
credit
Biden is on the
something,
list.
but they knew, they had all the data, they had all the knowledge of this COVID, they had all the knowledge of a drug that could have cured it, and they never used it. It
You know
was
what?
sitting on the shelf, and they never used
concede it,
it.
Kim.
I'm going to expose this. I'm going to expose it big because they were wrong. And
Okay,
let me-
Kim, even conceding that, there were 100 things more that President Trump did that were actual creative actions. Whether or not COVID was really, he gets full credit or not, I don't know. But the point is, I'm not going to make him the worst president just because he was controversial or
but I'm
some
gonna
people
play-
didn't like
I
him.
agree with you on that.
Right.
I agree with
Look
you
at
on
what
that.
Trump did
I was
let-
angry
versus how you
with
feel.
our government because they used up his time as a president with constant controversial issues that didn't mean a damn thing. I agree with you on that. We need to start supporting our presidents when they get there, whether we like them or not.
But
We need to stop
Trump
pushing
wasn't
aside
responsible.
controversies. Right.
Trump wasn't
We-
responsible for these controversies. You had the media after him from day one. You had that fake Mueller investigation. You had that fake impeachment because of a call to the president of Ukraine, all the while ignoring all the policy accomplishments that Peter pointed out. And that I will add, the First Step Act, presiding over a great economy that had the lowest unemployment rate for African Americans and Hispanics in history.
but guys,
He is nowhere near the worst president. He shouldn't be on the list. We need to substitute with Joe Biden right now.
I'm gonna play
Adam,
devil-
you
I'm gonna play-
always say about blacks and Latin Americans. What about white Americans? Did he do so well for white Americans?
Yes.
He did, yes?
The
With
economy did
tax
great.
reform, he did.
I'm
The
going to
economy
interject
did
for a
great.
second. But the
Until
thing that we
COVID.
haven't, the thing that we
And
haven't
job
talked about-
growth, guys. Look at the job growth under Trump.
No, but but I've seen data that shows that the job jump wasn't as much as other presidents. So I don't know. We need to go back and look at the data. But the thing that we haven't talked about, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here, that I think has to be considered to put right now. I'm not really focusing on Jackson, but I do think it's got to be Trump and Carter as the two potentially of the worst presidents. But the thing that I don't think we can ignore is the fact that this president refused to accept the transfer of power. And I mean, to me, I think that regardless of where was the evidence that the election was rigged? Where
Well,
was the
Steve.
evidence that the election was
Oh my
stolen?
gosh, Steve.
Steve,
You want
when
to
we
know?
He lost more than 60 lawsuits about the rigged election. So it's whoever person is continuing to
gosh.
repeat rigged election or so on should be actually brought to trial himself, because this is
No, I agree
proven
with
to
him. I
be
agree with him.
non-event. It's proven to be a big lie. Don't you understand that?
No, you know what? I could tell you why. I wasn't going to get into this because now people are going to blame me for saying that it was possibly. I'm not saying Trump won, but here's the problem I have.
But he
So-
lost. He never admitted he lost the election.
Will you
As the
please
president of the
wait
United States, he lost.
Steve,
never
wait one
publicly-
minute. Steve,
neither did
First of all-
Stacey Abrams when she lost the governorship of Georgia. Anyway,
We're talking about the
wait,
presidency of the
wait.
United
First,
States.
let me just say two points. One, presidents have in the past contested elections, and it's not the first time at all. As a matter of fact, we remember President Bush and the tabs and that controversy that went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. There was controversy in the Nixon and Kennedy election, but Nixon conceded. But even historians question whether Illinois was really whose side it fell on. But my point is, so all he did really was do it. But here's my to question it. But here's my problem with the election, and I'm not saying who won, but here's a big problem with the election. So Trump was winning going into midnight. Then in 6 cities, only in 6 cities, something weird happened. Most or all, I believe all of those cities had big histories of political corruption. Nevada, Philadelphia, long histories. Now, what happened at midnight was all of a sudden, coincidentally, in these 6 cities, Republicans were banned from watching the polls. In some places, like Atlanta, they said there was a leak. In the end, it turned out that leak was a leaky toilet, and that's all it was. But they threw the Republicans out. Now, in Philadelphia, they threw them out of the building, and they covered the walls with white paper. You can see the photos. So all of a sudden, it was like it could have been non-coordinated, but I don't know how it happened at once. Now, once the Republicans were out, all of a sudden the tides turned. And there's a lot of questions. A lot of people say that during that period, there were very unusual amounts of votes. Like what I've heard is in Detroit, something like 100,000 votes came in straight for Biden. And also, a lot of these votes came in without sub-votes, without any undervotes. So in other words, the votes would come in Biden, 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 but no, the people didn't vote for the House or the Senate or the mayor or any of the other elections. Now, so that seems like a pretty big controversy. And I'm not saying who won or who lost, but I'm saying that at least would give me pause to say maybe there should have been an election. Now, no judge was willing to take it, Sasha. So yes, all the courts ruled against them, but nobody looked at the evidence. Not one court, including the Supreme Court. They'll say, we don't have jurisdiction. We don't want to look at it. You know what? It was very dangerous and very controversial.
Yeah,
so it's not really been investigated fully. And some people
add one thing.
Peter, I'll tell you that most of these state judges were appointees by Trump and.
But it doesn't matter. They could have looked at it, but they would have been in danger. But wait, one last final point, then I'll let anybody speak. So, if not for these, the last point that's very suspicious is, first of all, if you look at bellwethers like Ohio, Trump won something like 23 out of 24 national bellwethers. And if you look at the bellwethers, they usually predict who won. And if you subtract these 6 cities from the election, Trump would have won big time. Those 6 cities swung the election. Coincidentally, the same 6 cities that coincidentally at the exact same time banned Republican poll watchers. So I guess he had at least the right to question the election.
But
not
he did so by he did more than 60 times going to court. He did so, and yet he couldn't win even one case. So
nobody heard the cases.
But he broke over 60 cases.
Yes, and nobody took one. No judge had the courage to take one because, it was very dangerous to take one, actually. I mean, if I was a judge, I would have been.
Trump is allowed to use
There would be evidence. They would take it, I'm pretty sure. Sorry,
but a lack of jurisdiction is not the same as deciding a case. And I'm not saying who would have won, but he had a right to question that. I'm questioning it.
Trump had the right to use the legal process just in the same way as Al Gore did in 2000. But that's not the point I want to make. Steve, for the last 20 minutes, we have been listing accomplishment after accomplishment that Trump achieved in office, whether it's the criminal justice reform, whether it's the lowest unemployment rate for African Americans and Hispanics, a great economy, no wars. We all collectively, when we talk about Carter, didn't point out a single accomplishment, instead noting its high inflation, the incredibly high taxes, the terrible economy, the terrible handling of the Iran hostage crisis. So for you to group Carter and Trump together as what you say are the candidates for the 2 worst presidents makes no sense to me, particularly when you have Andrew Jackson, who is an avowed racist and slaveholder that you're letting off the hook. The facts don't support your argument, and I would say that Carter is by far the winner in this dubious competition.
And I didn't mean to exclude Jackson as the moderator. What I'm saying, though, is both Trump and Carter were voted out after one term. So I do think that.
How does that impact whether you're the worst president? That could just be due to political vagaries. It's not the merits of the presidency.
And Trump lost in a very close election, at least.
And George H.W. Bush served one term. He's not
Carter got slaughtered. Actually, the biggest landslide ever.
I'm going to interrupt here for a minute. I'm going to interrupt. I want to say something about our election system sucks. Come on, people. We're in the 2021. That we can't do any better than this. We're still using an 8th century, as far as I'm concerned, voting platform of electoral votes. You guys suck. And you know what? The pre-campaigns where I have to wait until everyone else has been eliminated here in North Carolina to vote for somebody sucks. I don't give a damn of what the other states vote for. We should be able to elect for one person in one day. We don't. You know what? As far as I'm concerned, Hillary Clinton beat Trump. She won the people's vote. Not that I liked her, but she won the people's vote. She didn't win the electoral vote. As far as I'm concerned, it's a scam. All of it's a scam. All of it is a scam.
Is everybody hearing Kim with choppiness? Because I could.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
choppy.
Kim-
I mean, some of
Kim-
the times that's what
Kim-
happens
Kim-
on the
Kim- Lost
technology and all
Pennsylvania.
that.
Well, I'm just saying.
Points and everything that she's
No,
making.
Kim, half your words have been cut out the whole program. So
Hillary
it's
should have
hard to understand.
won.
Yeah, we can't. She needs to. It must be her Wi-Fi. We'll work on trying to correct that.
Tom was
Well,
relying
anyway,
on-
guys, I'm just trying to be objective here. I mean, I understand Adam's points. You have made some very good points. The only reason why I put him in the same category, and maybe I am excluding Jackson, but Adam, I got to tell you, I think you've made a strong argument of why it needs to be Carter as the lead because of the lack of substantive policies that we can see one way or the other. There's just not a lot there. I've looked and read and looked. I can't find really anything other than Camp David Accords, right?
Right.
But I do believe as an American that a president, if they lose the election, should concede that as a transfer of power. And he never acknowledged and called the president and said, congratulations. You know, maybe we give it more time. You know, maybe it's too soon after the Trump presidency to just come in. I mean, maybe, that could be another thing because as time goes on.
Steve, he would done it in 4 years. If he would stay as a president for 4 more years, he would then concede his presidency. I hope so.
And yeah, I hear what you're saying, Sasha. And Steve, the one question I'd ask about Carter as well as some of the others is, and that's something that we'll have to figure out as we do this whole process of elimination during the course of the weeks and everything, is how much weight do we give to people? And maybe Peter has got some thoughts about this, and even Adam, so those that really didn't have a long time to really make a impact one way or the other. Carter was only in there for roughly about 4 years, one-term president, and Biden has only been in for 1 year. So can we really say that he is the worst when we don't know what the next 3 years are going to look like? I mean, he may continue down the path that he is going, or he may do some amazing things in the next 3 years. So I think part of that is the reason of being a little hesitant to putting him on there. And I've had a lot of people even on the polls that have been asking and begging for him and things of that nature. And I'm saying that at some point I may actually wind up adding him to the list and everything. But that is
Mark,
one of the concerns I've got is how much time has he had to actually do stuff, and how much of a lineage test do we have in the sense of what they were able to do. Carter was only there for 4 years, and he came into a bad situation already than when he came into office. So I don't know that he made it that much worse and things along those lines. I'm not going to let Andrew Jackson off the hook, by the way, and I know he's got the lowest amount of votes, but if we're looking at, and I know it's something that Adam talks about often, the minority populations and things of that nature, there are 2 atrocities in America. Andrew Jackson had a major part in both of those. Slavery, he was definitely a supporter of slavery. He made no bones about that, and he was a supporter and a slaveholder himself and everything. And he definitely did a lot against the Native American population, and that population, which I also have some of that as part of my ancestry. I mean, if you look at the Trail of Tears, there was no doubt that he was very much responsible for that and did it in a very atrocious way. That was almost like in a lot of ways, to make comparisons to other ethnicities, but that was our own version of a Holocaust in the way that a lot of these people were destroyed and gotten rid of and the things of that nature. And we're talking multiple nations. It wasn't just one Indian nation. There were multiple nations, just like there are multiple tribes there in Africa and things of that nature. So it was definitely something that was done. And if you ever want to look at one of the groups that is very prominent right now, our Latin American population, a lot of them also have native roots, whether that is native roots from South America or Central America, or whether that is native roots from the Americas or North America. So it also impacts a group of people that are here in our society right now, if we look at it from a legacy standpoint. So I just wanted to add that 2 cents worth as well.
Mark, you could convince me. Wait, I want to say something. Mark, you could convince me because, first of all, I mean, I'm not a fan of Obama, and there were negatives and positives. We could get into that maybe later, but I'm not going to vote for Obama as the worst president for sure, because I think Obamacare was very questionable. I think there were several other issues, but the economy wasn't bad. It was slow, but it was bad. He avoided war. He did get it. He pulled us out of the Middle East, but he put us into Afghanistan, which didn't work out too well in the end. But going back there, I could be convinced of Jackson based on one thing. because I don't want to have Trump or Obama in there, and Carter definitely should be in the running because of everything that was said and everything that was said last week. But here's my question for you, Mark. Would you have, because again, he was really good on a lot of issues, but he was terrible on those two. So forget it. I'm not going to count slavery much because then you've got a whole row of presidents until Lincoln that we could hold that against, right? I mean, that was a big American mistake. But let's talk about the Trail of Tears and Indians. So here's the question, and I don't know the answer to this. If not for him, would you have major parts of the South be owned by the Indians today? Because had he not taken those actions, in other words, large parts of Florida, large parts of Georgia, Mississippi, large parts of the South were owned by millions of acres, and I don't know what you're going to say, but millions of acres were owned by the Indians, and there were maybe 125,000 of them. So from a wealth perspective, you might say these were pretty successful people. You know, maybe it was a disparity there on one side. On the other side, they had the right, and especially the Cherokees had the right, and they even said they could stay, and then they said later they had to go, and it was negotiated not by their leaders. So I can see both sides of this. So, but would you have them not do it and then say the United States has now got two countries, a country within a country? I'm not saying you should say one way or the other. What do you think?
Well, a lot of things are popping into my mind. One, I'm not that confident that we don't, in some ways, have two or maybe even three or four countries, even as the country is established right now.
That's true.
And some of that is around racial politics, around political divisions, around a number of other divisions as well. And a lot of those contracts were also written in such a way that they were favorable than in the original way that they were put out there, from what I understand. And then those contracts were plainly broken. And, you know, I'm not a lawyer, but from what I've seen, they were definitely torn apart and definitely ripped into a shred, almost as if they weren't written on. You might as well say they were not worth the paper that they were written on, if I can borrow that cliche kind of phrase, and things along that lines. And, you know, that whole question of what the country would look like, that's one of those hypotheticals that I don't know how it would look. I mean, we can make the same argument around reparation, which is a very popular conversation even now in our African-American community. And ironically, and I think and Adam can correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say that in some of his discussions, Trump was even willing to have some conversations around reparations and what should be done in that sense. I think that I remember hearing some conversations that he had with Kanye West and some others. Am I correct in remembering that, Adam, or am I wrong in remembering that?
I want to add something to this very important issue.
Hold on a second. I think I was asking Adam.
I was looking very carefully in the history of slavery in Canada. Now, in Canada, the same Indian tribes as is in the United States of America, almost the same. Okay. Now, the history of slavery is that the first settlers came to Canada, first actually from France and then England, and they've established both English Canada and then French Canada, which is primarily Quebec. Now, they were horrified by discovering a slavery, very strong system of slavery in the tribes which were population at the time of Canada. It was a very stringent system, and the level of exploitation and level of cruelty was second to none. So I would imagine that the same slavery system were in United States simply because the tribes were very similar, those populated Canada in 16th, 17th century and United States. So I think it's a very questionable issue about all question of slavery, who and when started and who is guilty of that. That was the system of the day. I'm not saying that the local tribes were guilty of establishing slavery or not. It was the system of the day, like in ancient Rome, for example. That was a slavery system. So let's imagine that the Rome was 2,000 years ago, and this was only 200-300 years ago. What's the difference?
Well, I think you make a good point, and that point is, and I'll make three brief points. Number one, it is not advisable to apply contemporary moral standards to the times back in 1829. It just doesn't. Right. It just doesn't work. Okay. Number two, yes, Mark is right that Trump did entertain the idea of reparations, which further reinforces my point that he cannot possibly be considered one of the worst presidents, because in addition to reparations, he signed the First Step Act, which no Democrat ever did, and presided over the lowest unemployment rate for African Americans in history. And number 3, Jimmy Carter, as this panel has aptly pointed out, did nothing. He did not inspire the American people. He did not lead on foreign policy. We were embarrassed in Iran. The economy was terrible. Taxes were high. Inflation was high. He is the runaway winner here. And I say that not because I dislike him personally or have any problem with him, but because that is what the facts show.
Okay, Adam.
Yeah.
One very important issue. I think we discussed it last week as well. The Carter actually did so much better after he finished his presidency. He is exceptional human being, philanthropist, and
do we factor that in?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
That's number one. Number two. I know a thing or two about economy. And in the last 2 years of Obama, the economy of the United States was getting better and better. The unemployment was reaching the incredible numbers, the low numbers, of course. And the Trump was very lucky indeed that he inherited very strong economy from Obama, believe it or not. So saying that the Trump did so well economically and he did it booming or so on, I have a lot of questions about that. Peter, I hope you understand my point of view.
Well, you're right, but the economy was okay, but GDP was growing at 2%. And when Trump ultimately took over, GDP took off. And not only that, Trump's policies brought back a lot of manufacturing to the United States, which is so critical.
Exactly.
I hope it continues. But
it's so confusing. And
now we're seeing that now with COVID, with the supply chains, with everything. But he brought back a lot of manufacturing. And during the prior years, many years, since NAFTA and everything else, they emptied out the factories in the Midwest a lot. And
Peter,
even the economy did very well under both. But you know what? Peter, I'm not going to fault either one because, again, Obama had his faults.
I can agree with all what you're saying. Is a very huge factor about Trump is nobody ever has country divided as much as Trump did.
That's politics.
Even in Obama time, I don't remember that.
Sasha, the country was divided far before Trump. Okay, number one. Number two, the argument that you're making and the argument that Peter is making only demonstrate beyond any doubt that neither Trump nor Obama should be candidates for worst president. And in that respect, I will agree with both of you.
Hey, Peter and
Adam, Carter is so heavy contender that even if you look at very carefully at what Trump is and what he did, and I don't want to repeat a lot of obvious things here on the show, but Carter is in the class of its own.
Carter's definitely a contender.
I agree. The thing is, I want to know the data.
But one thing that I was going to bring up is something that Adam brought up earlier, and I'm glad Nick's here as well and everything. But you say that we can't put things in perspective of the historical day era and things of that nature because it was a different era and a different moral code and everything. But my argument to that would be if you listen to most politicians of today, even modern politicians, they put us in the context of our Judeo-Christian background, in the context of our Puritan background as well. So I don't know that you can't put that as a factor when it is such a part of the political landscape on both sides. I don't know a candidate
because they're labeling somebody a racist. No, you're labeling somebody a racist by using contemporary standards and applying them retroactively to 200 years ago. Okay, that's like me calling every man a sexist who grew up in the 30s and 40s, and every man and woman a homophobe who grew up and a transphobe who grew up in the 50s and 60s. Culture matters, and the contemporary norms of a society matter. That's why, for example, the death penalty, we used to authorize beheading. We used to authorize really, really bad forms of killing people, but we don't anymore because society has evolved. So to take the current evolution of society and apply it backwards is wrong and leads to judgments about people that are inaccurate and don't take into account the complexity of culture and human nature.
Well, you know what, Mark? I want to say you could still sway me to go to Jackson, and I'll tell you, but I want to know the answer. And you never really said it. the question is, even though Jackson was so effective, I could be swayed by what he did to the Cherokees. And by the way, some of those treaties were just honored, and other ones, the Indians were the ones who broke them. The leaders signed it, and they refused to move, and they had to go to war to get them out. But what he did to the Cherokees, and so many people, a quarter of those people died on the march, and that was so unethical and so wrong by today's Christian standards. So I'll give you that. But then I ask you, was it a mistake? Would you rather have had 125,000 Indians at that time possessing much of the South, or would you have said in the end it was best in interest for the Americas to absorb those Indians? And by the way, the original choices in the treaties was you can stay, but you have to submit to our laws. You'll no longer be you can stay though, you can keep your property, but you have to submit. So you have to follow the state laws and the federal laws. You no longer have your sovereignty, but you can keep your property.
And
That
part
was
of
the
that, the
original
sovereignty
treaty.
question is still something that I have some questions about still to this day and everything. And still some of my ancestors and folks that are more active in the Native American side of the family still have some questions about that. I also wonder about the whole land situation, because we do know that those promises were even made historically speaking to even some African American communities, and then that land was taken away sometimes by banks, sometimes by various land grabs and things of that nature. So like I said, I will do some further diligence in terms of thinking about that and everything.
And
That's why I'm not giving you a specific answer.
Jackson.
Don't you remember what Jackson told the Supreme Court? You made your order, now enforce it. He thumbed his nose at the Supreme Court. He was a complete racist. He certainly belongs on the list. And when we look at Carter, I don't know why you guys throw Carter into the bus when he was able to get the Arabs, Jews together at the Camp David Accords. But we forgot that, didn't we?
No, that was his big accomplishment.
Okay, it was an
Big
accomplishment. So you got to look that up there. Then you look at what Trump did and what he didn't do. First, he starts off lying to everybody. I'm going to build a wall, and Mexico's going to pay for it. Okay, he never built the wall, and Mexico didn't pay for it. So he starts off as a liar, and everybody goes, "Oh, he's a great president because what? He's a liar." You want the liar in chief?
Because
I'd rather have Carter. At least Carter won't lie to me. But no, we'd rather have a liar sitting up there.
Nick,
half of the word he says isn't true.
No, Carter just thinks he's kind of embarrassing
never built the wall, and that's why Mexican didn't pay for it, because
He built a large part of the wall.
Yeah.
And he built
If
much
this
more.
discussion has proven anything, it's proven based on Sasha, Mark, and Peter that Trump should be nowhere near the worst presidents. It should be Andrew Jackson and Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter.
And your arguments have implicitly disqualified Trump, because if you focus on Andrew Jackson's misdeeds, which Nick, you aptly just pointed out, and Donald Trump's accomplishments and Jimmy Carter's failings, the question is clear.
Adam,
Carter number one, Jackson number two, end of story. Although Joe Biden will compete for the top spot.
Let me, as the moderator, let me chip in here playing devil's advocate.
He who owns the network owns
Good book.
The only thing with Donald Trump, I think before the big game changer was the COVID pandemic. Things were actually going okay for him policy-wise with the Trump tax cuts. Obviously he was going to build the wall. I think his biggest challenge was he had a great opportunity to really govern, and I think he just got so immersed into sort of being the first social media president. Millions of followers following him on Twitter, pretty much saying whatever he wanted to galvanize the base. But the bottom line is, did he manage the crisis effectively? Now, yes, I give him credit for coming up with Operation Warp Speed, getting the COVID vaccines developed with emergency authorization. But 500,000 Americans died on his watch as the commander-in-chief and president of the United States, 500,000. When he was president, only 14% of adults in the United States were vaccinated. When we knew that if you weren't vaccinated, that you could die from this pandemic.
How many people have died under Biden?
How could that not be factored in to his failure of dealing with one category, crisis? Because this was a war, a global war we were fighting, and we had a president that literally said, it's going to vanish, take some hydrochloroquine. I got
Steve?
COVID. That's how you can beat this.
That's very
Steve,
misleading.
if you want to look
Very
at
misleading.
It's
What do you mean
misleading.
very misleading? That's what he
this is an
said.
interesting point I'd like to make.
That's right. David K. Johnson wrote
He is
this book. Where
responsible
is he?
for
The big
Operation
cheat
Warp
baby.
Here we
Speed.
go.
He was.
Listen,
And
I'd like
just
to
as
make an
many
interesting
people are
point.
dying under Biden as they are under Trump, and Biden, the one who
No,
said
more
are dying under Biden than under
more
Trump.
have
Thank you,
died
Peter.
under
So
Biden.
your
than
argument
Trump.
about Trump
But
does
that's what I
not,
was
again,
going to
make any
say. But
sense.
the interesting thing is, every day, this is an indictment of our media more than anything. And let me explain what I'm going to say. So when George Bush was in Iraq, every day they reported deaths. And then as soon as Clinton took over, they stopped reporting deaths. I never saw it again on a single thing. Every day that Trump was president, they reported the deaths. They never report the deaths anymore on COVID. But the fact is, more Americans have died of COVID under Biden than under Trump. And
I'm just going on the
that is
data
a
that.
fact.
Yeah. And you know why, Peter? That's because
But he doesn't get-
bloody Republicans won't take the vaccine. Yeah,
No,
of course they
he
died.
was
That's not
data to
true.
support a
Give
narrative.
me a
just
bloody
because
break.
it
Well,
doesn't
more
work when you
people
look
have
at all the
died
facts.
under who was it? Biden, because they wouldn't take the vaccine.
I just want to say they're all full of crap because that drug existed prior to COVID hitting. They knew about it. They took it off the list. It had passed all human testing. It had passed since 2015 with no side effects. It was going through FDA. And then all of a sudden it comes off the shelf. And then now all of these pharmas have a pill. I want to know what that pill is. And you know what? That drug existed when Trump came out, was there in office.
And folks, as the
And
moderator,
I feel like they knew that drug existed, but instead of bringing it in and using it, they were pushing all of their other agenda. So as far as I'm concerned, Trump, he could have been a great president, but I think he turned his head to a lot of things that he shouldn't have, and he caused us great tragedy that did not need to exist. Now, unfortunately, that's because of things I know that went on behind the scenes. But I think that he was given a task that no other president had to deal with, and he was afraid of his own shadow.
Yeah, it's like a football player. He runs 80 yards, they
I have a
fumble.
question
Look,
for
you
you.
that
can't
drug
talk about
ball.
COVID without
Okay, let
talking
me
about
tell you,
the
fumble the
One
One
bloody
at a
ball.
time, please.
That
Adam,
drug still
I have
exists.
one question to you. You were very eloquent about criticizing Jimmy Carter, and one of his biggest fault, evidently, was failure in when the hostage crisis in Iran. But let me ask you this: all the following presidents up to even today's Biden, okay, all of them together, if the same crisis in Iran would happen today, what would be the difference? What would any of those presidents would do differently from Carter? Or do they have, or they wouldn't do probably anything, in fact, than to have a failure as Carter did. It's better to do nothing. What's your reply?
My reply is you're asking me about a hypothetical situation that I am not going to speculate upon. I don't know what a president would do. I don't know what Obama would do. I don't know what George H.W. Bush would have done. I don't know what George W. Bush would have done. I don't know what Bill Clinton would have done. So it's impossible for me to hypothesize on it, particularly because I
rephrase my question. What would be the options on each of them to do, if anything? What would
the options at that time?
Yeah.
The
Or
option
even today, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 35 years ago, what are the options?
Well, President Obama sent in a mission to kill
Peter, it's
Osama
different.
bin Laden.
Peter,
the option would have been military
It's
intervention,
different.
decisive military intervention.
Right.
Like the full scale
And I am
war?
not afraid to say it. You don't let hostages take over an embassy for almost a year. You go in there decisively with military intervention and you cut it off and you say, don't F with the United States.
Adam, but even Reagan
That's
didn't
Bush. Woo! That's Bush.
Don't compare me to Bush. Stop it, Kimberly.
US.
You know what? I have another point.
Yeah.
I have an Iraqi client, an Iranian client, and I am not familiar with the politics back then, but she blames Carter for the fall of Iran and the radicals taking over. Now, I don't know right or wrong there, but the whole fall of the Shah, the whole thing that led up to it. I mean, this was all under Carter's watch. And I don't, who knows what his options were back then, and who knows what a president would do. But his legacy, unfortunately for him, because he is a nice guy, is failure, failure, failure. I mean, we're talking about 18% inflation, 14% inflation. I mean, the CPI, Consumer Price Index, went up, I believe it was in these 4 years, 48%. Your dollar reduced by 48% power. That is an incredible tax on everybody, including the middle class, the poor. And he went to the United States, and he really got blamed for this. We haven't mentioned this, but he said America has a malaise, and that was his expression. And people hated that. It's like, thanks, you're blaming us for the malaise, and that was a very unpopular expression. So,
Well,
I mean, look, I always look at who I want to get the job done. If we were facing a new crisis and everybody had equal knowledge of the current events, I mean, I didn't like what Jackson did in a way, but on the other side, he'd be the kind of guy who gets the job done. So I don't know.
Well, it's just, I mean, I think first of all, we're getting ready for closeout. But I mean, first of all, I want to thank Adam Lamparello. You've been very articulate, laying out the case for Carter. I think, clearly he's at the list. We're not going to solve it tonight. We're going to debrief. But my only thing is it's about economic crisis. It's about foreign policy. It's about, do the American people believe that 4 years of leadership from the president was enough to keep them whole and happy? Like Ronald Reagan's statement in the presidential debate against Carter, he said, "Are you better off now than when you were 4 years ago?" And clearly the American people said, no way. And they voted Ronald Reagan with one of the largest landslides. And in 1984, an even larger landslide, probably the worst ever in modern history, against Walter Mondale. So, I think that this may not be the easiest analysis as we look at these presidents, but I do like Lamparello's point, Adam Lamparello's point about the contemporary times that we live in, and whether or not we can just go back in time and judge people and say, well, they're automatically terrible. I think Jackson has to be listed as one of the worst because of his treatment of slaves, and his inhumane statements, and the things that are coming out of the way he treated other minorities, which were despicable. And it's hard to believe that someone of that magnitude of hatred could occupy the Oval Office. So I think we have to now look at him in that respect. Here we are, the year 2021. But, the Democratic Party, they name their dinners the Jefferson Jackson dinners still today all over the U.S. So, guys, we're going to close out, but is there any final thoughts? I mean, I want to thank all the panelists for your tremendous insight. And, I think it's down to, sounds like Jimmy Carter, but Jackson, Trump, I don't know. Maybe it's a three-way tie. I know, Adam, you're not happy with that, but go ahead.